Hey everyone, I think this is live officially. Oh my goodness, this is my first live stream ever. And my name is Hope. I'm a senior product designer and UX design teacher here at Treehouse. And I'm reporting live from Berkeley, California. I've always wanted to say that because it makes me feel like a reporter. But yeah, this is week 3 of the quarantine or shelter in place for the Bay Area. So I know that everyone else is in the same situation, staying at home a lot, trying to stay healthy. So hopefully you all are doing well out there, and maybe this takes your mind off of all that scariness for just a few minutes to learn a little bit about design. So let's see here. I'm going to have a moderator looking at the comments and feeding me questions as they arise. Otherwise, shout out to my mom and Marilyn who's tuning in. Say hi to her in the comments. And I think we're going to get started. So yeah, I'm going to do a design Q&A. And I actually have a lot of great questions that were already submitted. So I'm going to start by answering those. But if you have any other questions, just ask them in the chat. And if I don't have time to get to them today, then I'll get to them in the next live stream. So first off the bat, what's the difference between a brand guide and a design system? So this is an excellent question. Thank you for asking. There's a lot of confusion about these terms, and they're used pretty interchangeably a lot, but basically the short answer is a design system is pretty wide and it encompasses a lot of things. So a brand guide is something that's within a design system. So I found this image on Twitter, and I think it's really helpful to visualize it. So as you can see, the dark area is a design system. And then within that, you have a style guide, which includes a brand guide, color, margins, padding, and so on. And then also within a design system, there's a component library, which you sometimes hear referred to as a UI library or pattern library. And it has different things like articles and heroes and images and all those little reusable blocks that are within a user interface. So I just wanted to show an example here. Help Scout just recently launched their style guide, and you can check it out on their website here. So they have their logos, a couple different options here, as well as a few options for their icon, square icon, circle icon, as well as all the clear space needed around the logo. And a really gorgeous color palette. These colors are so delicious. I mean, it just makes me want to eat candy. And so, so all of those are examples of what can be in a brand guide or a style guide. And then in terms of a component library, here's an example of Mina Markham's work. She was on Hillary's 2016 presidential campaign, and she worked as a designer and developer. And back in 2016, it was kind of the early days of design systems, and she was one of the people who really led the design systems discussion. She was pretty legendary, or still is. She works at Slack now, I believe. So she basically saw all the marketing collateral and saw, oh my goodness, there's really different ways of styling all this content. So she, you can see here, she found all these different types of headings, really different styles. Same with buttons. They basically, they're working really fast. They're on a fast-paced campaign. There's a lot of different people working on it. But they didn't really need to be reinventing the wheel for buttons. That's not the most efficient way of doing design and development workflows. So she created Pantsuit, which is the most adorable name for a UI component library I can think of, and very appropriate for Hillary. So she put all this together into a UI component library where she had definitive styles for all the headlines, the cards, the buttons, all the form elements. And so just to go back to that that image I showed originally, you can see how the style guide contains a brand elements. So that's like that Help Scout example that I showed. And then the component library example that I showed is Pantsuit. And so both of those come together and form a design system. And if you're curious about learning more about design systems, check out Diana Mounter's work. So I'm not sure if I'm saying her name properly, but Diana leads a design systems team at GitHub, and she's talked a lot about this subject. Specifically, if you get to hear her talk about color, it's really fascinating. And so check her out on YouTube. Some of her talks are available online. And then, of course, we have some excellent content at teamtreehouse.com, which is where I work. My buddy Anwar taught this wonderful workshop that's available on there. You can stream it anytime. It's called Introduction to Design Systems, and it goes into way more detail on this subject than I am today. And specifically, if you're interested in iOS design for iPhones or iPads, check out the Human Interface Guidelines workshop. And then if you're interested in designing for Android, check out Material Design, which is also a workshop. So we got a question in here. Do you have these images available to be viewed somewhere after this video call? That's a great question. I actually experimented with setting up this slide deck in Figma. I usually use Google Slides, but yeah, I have it as a Figma file, so I can definitely share the link. I'm not sure how technically yet, how I'm going to get the link out to everyone, but TBD, I'll try to find a way. All right, so next question here. Can you tell me about what to do next after completing the UX tech degree to continue strengthening my UX profile? And then they specified to say they're interested in UX research, problem solving, and wireframing. So not so much the visual design, high fidelity side of things. Sorry. Little burp. This is real life. This is all the stuff that the video producers and the audio engineers take out of my polished videos you see on teamtreehouse.com. This is the real stuff live. All right. So number one thing I would suggest you do is to revisit your projects. So for those of you that aren't aware of our tech degree, it's actually a curriculum that takes folks generally about 6 to 8 months. So there's a lot of growth in that time. And so all the different projects that you work on as part of the tech degree, I definitely encourage you to revisit your older projects. Pretty much anything I've worked on, I can look back at it and go, oh, I wish I could have done it this other way. There's so many ways I can just like refactor what I already did or improve upon it. So I encourage you to do that. Just go back to those older projects and see how you can make it better. And also fill in the gaps. So is there anything else you can add to your project to really round out your case study? Perhaps you can add in a task flow or do some more remote user testing. Just anything that you can just add to show off your skills. It also really helps to get some real world experience. So definitely at this time, it's really good to help out local businesses who are struggling during this pandemic. So if you can reach out and see, maybe they have a problem placing online orders right now. They typically are, brick and mortar business that have folks come in, but they're having to do online ordering and in-person pickups because of the virus. Maybe you can help them out. And so it's a win-win. So you get some experience, they get some free or low-cost design help. Also, follow some smart people online. So maybe you don't know a lot of UX folks who are working in the field. I would recommend checking out this site called Women Who Design. So the way this works is it just scrapes Twitter bios and finds folks who are UX designers and also graphic designers and so on, but you can filter by expertise. And so here I have selected researchers and UX designers. So I can just click through and follow them on Twitter. And it's just kind of a cool, low-key way of connecting into the UX research space. And so that way, when you're just lounging after in the evening times, you can just kind of casually see updates from these folks. You can see what they're reading. maybe something that their team launched recently, maybe update to their portfolio, and you can stay connected. And then also read books, of course. So I just scanned my bookshelf when I was putting this talk together, and I found my favorites. So one of them is Lean UX, which is all about really quick and dirty user research that you can do. And I like that it's really practical, and it's great for smaller teams and companies or startups that have less resources. And then there's also this book called Sprint, which is from the folks that, or a few folks that used to work at Google Ventures. And their job was to go around to different companies that Google had invested in. And they would leave 5-day sprints. So they would go in and have the team come up with different ideas. They would iterate upon that. They would create really rough prototypes and then test it out. So that way, in just 5 days, they could get really good insights about their product, and it would inform what direction they go in. All right, just checking the questions here for a second. Okay, we're all good. Another book is from Austin Kleon. I really love this author. He's got a few books out. Really creative, really funny, interesting person. All of his books are really enjoyable to read. But this one in particular, I think, helps you understand how to share your work online. And specifically, he has a section about thinking about your process, not the end product. And I think that's really of interest for folks who are getting into user research. Often the value that you're adding is your thought process and how you approached solving different problems. So any way that you can articulate that is really going to benefit you in attracting maybe a new client or someone who wants to hire you for a job. And then I really love Meg Lewis. If you're not following her online, she's a really interesting person. She has a lot of really interesting brand design, and she helps coach people to find basically their true selves. And so this is just kind of like a general recommendation for when you're building out your portfolio and kind of trying to figure out your personal brands. And I know that term is just a little cheesy sounding to think of yourself as a brand, but she does it in a really approachable, fun way and kind of helps you understand what kind of work you want to be doing, what kind of companies you want to work for, what kind of products you really align with in terms of who you are and where your interests are. Because as you're building out your portfolio, the work that you add on there is going to attract certain types of companies. So, and it's like a workbook style. So it's very interactive, and there's all these fill in the blanks, and she basically walks you through how to fill this out so you can figure out basically your life's purpose and the kind of work that, excuse me, the kind of work you should be creating. All right, so checking in on the questions for a second. Oh, a couple people are saying, what is this? They've joined late. So this is a design Q&A. So I'm just answering a few questions from folks who submitted them previously. And if you have any questions in general about design, just pop them into the chats. And if I don't get to it today, then I'll get to it in my next live stream. So right now I'm answering a question about what to do after taking our UX design tech degree at Treehouse. So my next tip is to listen to podcasts. So these are a few of my favorites on the left here. Design Details talks about the design process. They interview different designers. If you dig deep, like 3 years back, they used to have an old format where they would interview different designers and see how they got their start. And I think that's really fascinating because you get to hear about how they totally bombed an interview and really goofed up at a client presentation and kind of all those little details that you don't really know about someone's journey, all their struggles early on. You see kind of the highlights reel. You see this really successful designer And it's honestly pretty intimidating, but the way that they approach those interviews, you really get to hear all the dirt about what really happened and how that made them who they are today. And then there's also Design Matters, which is hosted by Debbie Millman. That's more of a general interview of different creatives, also really focused about origin stories and how people got their start. And then in terms of just learning about business and products and how they're made, I recommend How I Built This. There's also Overtime by Dribble, which is also hosted by Meg Lewis. You'll see a theme in the recommendations I give. Anything by Meg Lewis. So she talks about UI, UX design, also really funny, entertaining design news and that kind of thing. There's also a new one by Adobe. I haven't gotten to check it out yet, but it looks really interesting and it is focused around UX design. This is called Wireframe by Adobe. And then also just watch how products are changing. So I found out about this site recently called GoodUI.org, and they have this thing called leaks where they basically show what A/B tests different companies have ran. So for instance, Netflix tried out a change in their hero. So on the left, you see there's no text input field. There's just a try it now button if you want to sign up for Netflix. And then on the right, they experimented with adding in an input field for signing up for your email address right up front. So just really interesting how they stuck with the one that asked for the email address up front. And yeah, there's a bunch of those leaks on there. It's just funny how it's named. But feel free to check that out. You can kind of just be a fly on the wall and see what different companies are trying out and what's working for them. And then just in general, be a sponge. There's so many things online that you can read. The Nielsen Norman Group is one of those websites that's really reputable. Jacob Nielsen is kind of one of those pioneers in the UX design space. And they publish a lot of great articles. So that's another resource for you. All right, any other questions? All right, yeah, not so much. I guess there's a question about how to know when something is done in a software development sprint. I would say that's a little outside of the scope of this one because I'm trying to focus just on design specifically. But yeah. Oh, wait, no, sorry, I read that wrong. You're talking about when to know a UI is done in a software development sprint. Yeah, that's a good question. I think I might try to tackle that in my next Q&A because that's a complicated one to ask or to answer right away. Someone said, could you repeat the leaks site, please? Sure. So GoodUI.org, and they have a little a tab here for leaks. And yeah, I'll try to get the slides out. I think we might be able to make that happen. So that way you can find the links a little easier. All right, so next one is how do you create a vector logo? I'd be interested in the design process as well as the technical aspects. Also, a really good question. And the keyword here that really sticks out for me in a big way, and it's bringing back a lot of memories for me, is the word vector. So I'll explain what vector means in a bit for those who don't know. But a vector logo is very important, and I'll explain why. So this is a logo from the archives. This is over 10 years old, and this is one of my very first logos. I think it might be my first logo that I ever created. So this was for a bar, and I just did this as like a freelance thing whenever I was in college. And so whenever they asked me to do the logo, I was like, sure. And I just created this logo in Photoshop, and it's all pixel based. It's not vector. And I learned this the hard way. So at first it was fine because it was on the website. And so it was pretty small scale, didn't have to be, really super high quality in terms of pixels and resolution. And then they said, well, we want to put this logo as a window cling on the front of the restaurant or the bar. And the print shop needs a vector logo. So I started Googling and I was like, oh my goodness, I should have designed this in vector format. Because what happens when you zoom in on a raster image is it all gets pixelated. So as you can see here, these edges are not crisp. It doesn't look good. So I actually couldn't find the vector format of that. I ended up just going into Adobe Illustrator and having to redraw this. I think I might have done a live trace, which the machine can guess where the lines are and plot the vectors for you, but it gets quite messy and you tend to have to redraw part of it anyway. But just to show you an example, here's the icon from the Treehouse logo, which is in vector. So you zoom in, it looks all crisp and fresh and amazing. Super big fan of vector now. And the reason why is that vector images are made up of all these points and lines. So if you see all these little squares, those are points where the line changes in the vector. And then all these little circles are handles that are on those points. So as you go in the design file, which I love using Adobe Illustrator for anything vector-based, well, not screen design, but anything where you're really getting down and dirty with the Bezier curves, that's what these are called, and any kind of plotting vector images, Adobe Illustrator is the jam. But anyway, yeah, you just adjust these handles to change the curve. And so all of this is done with all this math and all this stuff. You don't have to know math, thankfully, but there's all this stuff under the hood that is allowing these points to scale up and scale down with a very small file size and keeping everything really crisp. All right, and then from the conceptual side of things, I just wanted to show an example of something I did for a personal project. Because I'm not really a logo designer. I can design a logo, but that's not really my focus. But yeah, for this personal project, I did make a logo. It kind of came from this sketch that I did. So my personal project is Earth Lover. Sorry, another burp. So for Earth Lover, I basically talk about sustainability tips, and I have a website for it, and I just wanted a simple logo. So I had done this drawing, and I had done some hand lettering for the word Earth and Lover. And so when I wanted to make the logo, I was like, well, I guess I could just use that. But I mean, it's not super legible, and it kind of makes you want to turn your head like you're a dog asking for a treat. And so that didn't really make sense to me. And I kind of wanted something more clean, even though this has kind of a funky hand-drawn vibe. So this was one of the early ones that I did, just going back to the sketch. I was inspired by the sun basically coming up over the horizon and how that shape reminded me of the shape of her eyes. And I liked how basically the writings I've been doing, it's about awakening your consciousness to your impact on the earth. So I liked the connection between opening and closing your eyes and the sun coming up and down from the horizon. So I wanted to play with that conceptually in the image. And for this version, I think this really reads more like an eye. I'm not really getting much sun vibes here. So I ended up reworking it to be more balanced and have the sun and the eye. So that's just one example. I kind of did this pretty quickly, and I did want to show an example of someone who's a legit logo designer. Oh, by the way, this is in context. This was on the website that I made. But a legit logo designer is my friend Jenna Carando, and she designed this logo for Gusto, which I believe is a HR kind of payroll kind of startup, and they work with a lot of different businesses to help them with their HR and payroll. So they recently did a really huge rebranding of their product and their brand. So she worked on that. And if you want to read more about it, they have a really beautiful brand guide, gusto.com/brands. And you can read about, what their new logo means to them and how they approached it conceptually. And there's also this site called underconsideration.com/brand new. And they do these teardowns of different brand identities. And they really get into analyzing it and critiquing it. And I think reading it will help give you some insights of how to approach logo design. So you can see here on the left was their old logo, and on the right is their new logo. And their review is like really quite positive because it's a really great logo. All right. I think that was everything. I just kind of flew by all my slides. Let me check out the chat. We do have a few more minutes here. Do you have any recommendations on UX tools that have helped you? UX tools. Well, I do use Sketch for my my screen designs, and then I use Abstract to manage those files. Abstract really helps teams work on the same file at the same time because they have a really neat versioning system. But I also really love Figma. Actually, this presentation was made in Figma, and Figma is really neat. It's browser-based, and different folks can work on this file at the same time. And I'm trying to think what else. I mean, I've been doing some user interviews just in Zoom, the video conferencing platform that's really popular right now. And I just take notes in Google Docs. Specific UX tools. Yeah, I think that's it. I think it's just, a good solid design tool and some kind of way to video chat with folks, especially now since we're all working remotely. There's also Google Forms, which I've used for finding participants to do user tests with. Sometimes you need to narrow down your participants so that way you're doing user interviews with people who fit the target audience. So you can use Google Forms to do a survey and just basically narrow down who you want to interview. And someone said, will this broadcast be archived? I wouldn't mind rewatching it. Oh my goodness. I'm so flattered that you would want to watch this again. That makes me feel really good. So this is being streamed out to, I think, 4 different platforms. And I think all of them do automatically save a recording. So you should be able to rewatch it right after. All right, I have a couple more minutes here. I'm just going to scroll through the chat and see if there's anything I missed. Yeah, definitely you can rewatch it on YouTube, Twitch as well. I saw all of our past live streams that we've done in the last couple of weeks. All those recordings are on Twitch too. And then I know we're also on Twitter via Periscope. And there's another one. I don't even know where this video is going. What's done in Vector? Can the same be done in something like Adobe Sketch or Adobe XD? Yeah, so Sketch is also, oh wait, someone said Adobe Sketch. Yeah, Sketch isn't made by Adobe. But yeah, so Sketch is really for screen design, so it's more of a UI design tool. Although I've created a lot of vector illustrations in Sketch. It's just that Sketch doesn't have as many tools as Adobe Illustrator does if you want to get into more like more of the detailed design work. I guess if you're making more like super blocky vector illustrations, if you're making it in that style, then you can get away with using Sketch. But if you want to do something more artsy or like more intricate, or you want more effects and transforms and all kinds of really cool stuff, Adobe Illustrator is really the best for all that. It has the most flexibility. And then Adobe XD is also more for screen design. So you're going to be much more limited in the kind of tools that you have access to when compared to Adobe Illustrator. But if you want to do something simple, those can definitely be made in Vector in either Sketch or Adobe XD. All right, I think that wraps up everything. So be sure to drop in any more questions that you have in the chat. I'm looking for questions to talk about next time in my next live stream. And if you don't want to post it in the chat, you can reach out to us on social or teamtreehouse.com. Thank you so much for joining me, and I hope that this was entertaining and interesting, and maybe you learned something. All right, have a good rest of your day. Bye.